Alright, so for this hands-on exercise, we are going to be working in the Pivot Tables Before Excel workbook. You can get or download this workbook by clicking on the button directly below the video that says Excel Before. Alright, so what we have in this workbook is two tabs. We've got the Pivot Table tab and we've got our data. So on the Pivot Table tab, this is where our blank canvas is going to end up showing up for the pivot table, and this is the location, pretty much where my mouse is or my cell reference is right now, B8. That's where we're going to put our pivot table. So before we get started here, let's go and explore the data set a little bit just to see what we have here. So the way I'm going to do that is use our shortcut to navigate to the data tab, which is I'm going to hold down Control and then I'm going to hit page down, which is our shortcut. And there we go, we're on the data tab here. So what we have in this data tab is we have NBA team salaries and player salaries by season start and end year. So we have all of the NBA teams represented here, and we also have the NBA players that were representative or included in that particular season that is represented here. So before we do this, let's just see and explore our data a little bit more to see how many teams we actually have. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to highlight the team and select the team in column A here. I'm going to do Shift Control down arrow key. I'm going to click Control C to copy that, and I'm just going to come into an open space here in column I and just hit Control V to paste. From there, I'm going to come up to the Data tab here and click Remove Duplicates. And what that's going to do is give me how many teams are associated with this data set. So what we have here is our column name of team, obviously, and there's only one column name here, so it's selected already. If there were multiples here, we may have to unselect and then check the one that we want to remove the duplicates from, but in this case we only have one, so we're all set to go. We also have that our data has headers. Excel knows that we have a team header here, so we're going to keep that checked and we're going to click OK, and that'll give us the 2,513 duplicate values found and 29 of them remain. So there are 29 teams represented here in this data set. So a decent amount of teams here and a good amount of data given what we're trying to do here. So that is just an overview quickly on how we can look and see how many teams are represented here. So let us delete this real quick, and then let's go back to our data set. So you can see that this data set's already formatted in a data table. So that means it's got this pre-filtered view on it right now. So I can come up here and click these down arrow keys, and I can see here, I already know how many teams are represented here, 29, but this just gives me a visual representation of all that. And you can see that each team now is in alphabetical order. That is also true for our data set here. It starts with the Atlanta Hawks and ends with the Washington Wizards. So A to not quite Z in this case, but pretty close. Alright, so that is one attribute on this data set. The next attribute we have here is season start. So you can see that our seasons start in the year 2010 and end in the year 2015. Okay, so that's when the season starts. And we know that NBA seasons straddle years, meaning that they start in one year and they end in the next. So our end year here, the 2010 season ends in 2011, and that goes all the way through 2016. So we have basically 2010 through 2016 data here by year. So the next attribute column is player rank. And you can see here we have player ranks 1 through 15. So 15 NBA players per team are represented here. So this is also in numerical rank order by team. So you can see here, I can select here and you can see that Atlanta Hawks, there's the player ranks. Okay, next we have the attribute of player names. This is the actual player associated with that. And you'll see when I click on the drop-down filter here, it is in alphabetical order. That's nice, so we can actually potentially uncheck or look for specific individual players here when we do this filtering. So if I wanted to do that, I could click on, let's just say, Al Horford for a minute here, and then you can see Al Horford played for the Atlanta Hawks throughout this data set. And you can see also that his rank improved. Interesting. So he started his 2010 season ranked as the 6th player on the team and ended up being the 1st player for the 2014 and 2013 seasons here. Dropped a little bit in 2015, but still top 2. Interesting. All right. You can also see that his salary is representative of that. So not to get too much into the analysis of this data set, but that's an interesting insight there. Okay, so the last item we have here is salary. So if you recall, this is our metric for the data set. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attributes and 1 metric in this data set. So sometimes that is different, obviously, on different data sets, but in this case we have 1 metric and 5 attributes. Okay, so let's actually create the pivot table. So in order to do this, I need to go back to our pivot table tab, and the way I'm going to do that is hold down Control and then hit page up, which will get me back to the original starting point. So that's a shortcut to get back to where we were, or just move 1 tab backwards. Okay, so I am going to navigate, as we learned, to the Insert tab here, and I'm going to click on this pivot table button. And once I do, I'm going to be presented with the pivot table wizard, as we learned. Okay, so how am I going to do this? Well, I am going to select my data set that I want to include. So I'm going to click this up arrow right here, and then I'm going to navigate to my data tab. And the way I'm going to do that again is I'm going to hold down Control and go hit the page down button, and then I'm going to start in cell A1. I'm going to hit the Shift key, hold down Control, and move to the right by hitting the right arrow key, and then I'm going to hit the down arrow key while still holding down Shift and Control. Now what this did is it selected my entire data table, and you can see that that's represented here by table 1. Okay, great. So that is my data table, and that is my NBA salaries by year and season by player. So I can click or hit enter, and that is going to be my data range. You can see that it's selected as table 1. So that's my data table. Now Excel already knows that my starting point was B8 on the pivot table tab, and I want to keep it as that. So when I click OK, this is going to bring me back to where we were, and it's going to give me that blank pivot table canvas. So I'm going to click OK, and there it is. Here's our blank pivot table canvas. And then also on the right hand side here, we have our pivot table fields list. So if I move away from this, you're going to notice that my pivot table fields list goes away as well. That's okay. I just need to click back on this, and there it is. We're back to where we started. Okay, perfect. So what can I do with this pivot table? Well, over here we have our metrics, or in this case we have our attributes and our 1 metric of salary. So I've got the team, our season start, season end, rank, player, and salary. Okay, let's recreate what we looked at in the slides earlier. Let's bring our team name, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold down my mouse and I'm going to drag it to the rows section of the pivot table. Okay, you'll see here are my 29 teams represented here, and I can see here count 29. Perfect. Okay, so here are my team names. So this is my attribute 1, my first attribute. From there, I'm going to bring in my season start, and I'm going to drag it to the columns. Here you'll see I have all of my season start years across the top. So I have attribute 1, and I have attribute 2 across the top here, which is the season start. Okay, so what can I do next? Well, let's bring in the salary metric so we can see the team salaries by season start. And I'm going to do that by dragging the salaries metric to the values section, so in this section. Next, I'm just going to highlight all of this data here that has the salary dollars in it. I'm going to hit Control 1, and that is going to give me to the number format, and I'm going to change this to accounting, and I'm going to reduce the decimal places just to change it to a dollar format, and then I'm going to just increase the space here. Okay, great. So what we can see here, let's just go through this a little bit and see if we can get some insights. Let's just center this header here. It's always nice to clean up your data a little bit before you start looking at it, just so it's a little bit more visually pleasing for you, and if you're doing this with an audience, you have a cleaner data set. Okay, so what we can do here is just look a little bit and see what's going on here. Well, we have each team alphabetically here, and it goes from Atlanta Hawks again to Washington Wizards, and we have our years, season start years across the top. So this is all well and good, and it is very helpful for us to see in aggregate the trend of the team's salaries over the years. So I can also come here in this data, in this pivot table, and use this drop-down menu as a filter similar to the way I did before. So what can I do with this? Well, say I would like to see a few teams here. So I'm just going to randomly select a few teams here. I'll go with Brooklyn, Cleveland, Dallas, and let's go with the Heat. Okay, so I have selected 4 teams here. Now what I can do is I can look at these teams and I can do a couple things. One, I can come over here to the grand total. I can right click and I can go sort, and I can go largest to smallest. So out of these teams, in aggregate grand total here, per team in this data set, out of these 4 teams, the Brooklyn Nets had the highest total salaries from 2010 to 2015 in aggregate. Okay, interesting. But if you come and look here, what you'll see is that that's not necessarily the case for each individual season. So say I wanted to look at the 2015 season and do the exact same thing. So what I could do is I could right click here and also do a sort, but I'm doing it specifically on the 2015 start season. Interesting. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, it looks like in aggregate, the Brooklyn Nets had the highest aggregate team salary, but the Cleveland Cavaliers had the highest 2015 salary, and by far. Okay, so that's interesting. That probably warrants a little bit more analytical research in here. So how can we go about figuring out what happened between 2013 and 2015 for the Cleveland Cavaliers? Because what we're looking at here is basically this doubled between here and here, so 2013 and 2015. Well, one way to do that is to add the player attribute to this data set. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the player attribute and drop it directly underneath my team name. So what I have here is I have my player names right directly underneath my team names. So I still have the same teams, and then I also have a total by team here. So this is a little bit messy to look at. So I'm going to do a couple things first. I'm going to come here and make sure my pivot table, I'm actually clicked on my pivot table, or my pivot table is actually selected, so my pivot table fields names are showing, and I'm going to come up to the design tab. Now, I prefer my subtotals in this case to be at the top of the group so I can see the team total salaries per season. So I'm going to click that button, and you'll notice here I have a bunch of now totals here, and I can see that big change from 2013 to 2015 a little bit easier here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to report layout, and I'm going to click on tabular format. What this is going to do is change the layout a little bit so it's easier to read. So right now I have my team name, and then I have my player name right next to that. But if I scroll down a little bit, I'm losing my team name. So what I want to do is change this so I can read it a little bit better. So I'm going to come up again on the design tab here. Now you'll notice if I move away from this pivot table, the design tab is going to go away as well. So I also have to be on the pivot table canvas for this design tab to show up. So I'm going to click on design, I'm going to come to report layout, and I'm going to click on the show in tabular form. Okay, so that just brought my team name to the left of the player name, and now I can see it a little bit easier. But you'll notice I've got all these blank spaces here, so I have the same problem. If I scroll down, I still don't know what team these individuals are for. So let me come up here back to the design tab, and under on that same report layout, I'm going to click repeat all items. Okay, great. So now I have my team name and my player name and then the associated salaries. Cool. So this is just a little bit easier to read. Now the one thing we noticed was that the 2015 season was the highest for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it was almost double what the 2013 season was. So I want to see which player contributed to that increase, because if you recall, it doubled from 2013 to 2015, so something changed. Likely the structural makeup of the team changed. So the way I'm going to do that is come to this 2015 cell here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to sort by largest to smallest. So what this is going to give me, it's going to give me the highest salary by player for this particular team. So if I click this, and that's exactly what I was expecting. So what happened? Well, you'll see all this white space here. These two players, LeBron James and Kevin Love, were not on the team in the 2013 season. So they effectively were not contributing to that total salary for 2013. And any basketball fan knows that these two individuals are quite well paid. So if I look here, I can see just between those two players for the 2015 season, they contributed a total of $42 million, almost $42.5 million to the total salaries. So if you recall, our salaries went from roughly $43 million a year in 2013 to almost $105 million. So what we have here, of that $105 million, $42 million of that was associated with two players. If I scroll down a little bit more, you can see here that $57 million, and I'm looking down here at the bottom, was associated with these top three players, which now I've included Kyrie Irving in here, and you can see his salary doubled from the 2014 season to 2015 season and almost tripled from the 2013 season. Now I can add Tristan Thompson to that, who had a very similar salary change like Kyrie did between seasons, and you can see that his salary almost tripled from 2014 to 2015. So between those years of 2013 and 2015, we had a massive change in salaries, and the majority of that was associated with four players. $71 million of that change was associated with those four players. Okay, interesting. So that's just a basic, very, very brief analysis there that we just did on team salaries for the Cleveland Cavaliers. We saw that LeBron James, Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving, and Tristan Thompson were the reason for that very, very dramatic change between the 2013 and 2015 season. Okay, but this is a pivot table lesson. But what did I just do? I used the pivot table tool to slice and dice and gain insight into my data before I did any analysis. I did some sorting and some different views of the actual data in the pivot table, and we came up with an insight. We came up with that 4 out of, in this case, 15 players on the team, based on the rank, were contributing to that massive increase. So I'm going to move back over here to the left, and I'm going to unselect all this data. So I have now team name, the player name, and then the seasons over here. Okay, perfect. So what else can I do with this? So I can do anything really with these attributes and metrics. I can move the team underneath the player, and then it's a little bit more messy, but what this does is a couple things. One, so Joe Johnson here. You can see here that Joe Johnson has played for 3 different teams during this period of 2010 to 2015 here. So he started with the Atlanta Hawks in 2010 to 2011. Then he moved to the Brooklyn Nets, and it looks like he spent time in 2015 in both the Brooklyn Nets team and the Miami Heat team. Now we have Kobe Bryant here, who obviously spent his entire career with the Lakers, and you can see that in this data set. He's represented here by the Los Angeles Lakers for each of those years of season starts. So interestingly enough, we have a different view here that gives us a completely different insight now. Now we're looking at the player, but we're also looking at the team attribute to see where they are, and we're using the metrics or the metric of salary to see the different teams that they've played on. What else can we do here? Well, we can take out team, and then we can see here that we have these individual players and their salaries by season start. So the sort is currently still on 2015 being the year that we want to sort from highest to lowest. And you can see Joe Johnson was the highest paid player per the 2015 season in this data set. What happens if I want to look at this in total from 2010 to 2011? Well, I can come over here in my grand total and sort from largest to smallest. And you can see here, over this data set period, Kobe Bryant earned $156 million over these 5 years, or over these 6 years. And if I look at his, I can look at the average salary, and that is $26.1 million. So one other thing that I can do with this pivot table is change the way that the grand total operates. So I can click on this grand total, right click, and come down to summarize values, and I have a different option here that I can summarize this data by. Sum, count, average, max, min, and product. So let's look at the average. So what this is going to do is going to give us the average of the salaries per season by player. So in this case, Kobe Bryant, you can see here that his average salary looks to be around the $25 million mark if we just take a look at it. But if we actually use the average function in the pivot table, we can see that it actually was $26.1 million. Same thing for Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, LaMarcus Aldridge. You can see here he only is represented once here, so probably not a great representation. This would probably be somebody that we'd want to remove from this data set if we were using this for an analysis purpose. We don't want his $19.5 million to sway this analysis because, as you can see here, he's not fully represented in this data set. Probably the same thing here for Gilbert Arenas, but the opposite. He left the NBA back in 2013, so we'd probably want to remove him from this data set. Okay, we can do the exact same thing, so I can remove player here, and this is going to give me the average salary by season start year just in total. So for the NBA, for this 2010 through 2015 season starts, the average salary per player represented in this data set was $4.7 million. What happens if I want to see this by team? Well, I can just bring in the team to the row side, and I can see that my 4.7 down the bottom here still remains, but I have now the average by team. So I can come over here and I could sort by right-clicking and click sort, and I can go largest to smallest, and I can see that the Lakers, Nets, and Chicago Bulls had the top 3 average player salaries, which makes sense. Los Angeles is a high dollar market, Brooklyn is a relatively high dollar market, and Chicago is a relatively high dollar market as well. So and then we have New York and Miami. So makes sense geographically that your salaries would probably be higher in these markets. Okay, great. So I've done quite a few things here with this pivot table. What else can I do? Well, I can do the same thing by the team rank or the player rank. So as you would expect, my number 1 ranked player on each team has the highest average salary, followed by 2 all the way down to the 15th ranked player, which their average salary is $626,000 per year. So interestingly enough, I can come over here and just do a quick analysis. So I can take a look at the 15.8 million, and I can come over here and look at this 626,000. So all I'm doing is just moving my mouse to the right and selecting that cell. And what we can do here is we can see that the top-ranked NBA player makes 25 times more per season than the 15th ranked player. Just another interesting insight. So as you can see, pivot tables are extremely functional. I can do several different things, including slicing and dicing my data, in this case by team, by season start, by season end, by player rank, by the actual player, and by the salary itself. So one other interesting thing that I can do with this pivot table is to remove rank and bring the average salary over to my rows. Now, what this is going to do is pretty much give me a mess. So all I have here is a bunch of different numbers all the way down, and it's going to be representative of a bunch of different salaries all the way down. But what I can do here is I can bucket these salaries using some of the built-in functionality of the pivot table itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going down to the group option here. So I'm going to click group, and I'm going to be presented this grouping dialog here. So where do I want to start? Well, I think what I want to start with is the reasonable number here. So I'm going to put in 5,000, which is a very low number, but you can see we do have an $8,000 per season here. So let's do this. Let's end our salaries here at 35 million. So we want to do something higher than the largest number here. So let's type in 35 million here. Okay. And I believe that is correct. I think I put an extra 0. That's 350 million. Okay, so 35 million. And let's group them by $5 million. So what that's going to do is it's going to bucket our data into buckets that start at 5,000 and go by $5 million buckets. So, you know what, let's change this 5,000 to 0 because we'd rather have that be from 0 to 5 million be our first bucket. I'm going to click OK, and you're going to notice here that my salaries now are, but my average salary from 0 to 35 million is now bucketed by buckets. So what I can do here is come over and bring in the player name and drop it into the values. And what that is going to do is give me the count of players. And I'm going to just quickly format this and change this to the number. So this is going to give me the count of players by season start that fit into each one of these buckets. So what this means is that in the 2010 season, 290 players earned between 0 and $4,999,000. As I go down here, there was only one player that earned between $20 and $24.9 million. No players above $25 million. That changes in the 2011 season, and that changes in the 2012 season, and then that goes back to more in the $20 to $24.9 million range in 2013, but we have this interesting outlier here. Okay, so we have an outlier here that's earning between $30 and $35 million. So let's see who that is. Let's double click on this one to see who that is. Okay, interesting. Kobe Bryant. That's who I would have thought in 2013 would have had that salary. So you can see that Kobe Bryant on the Los Angeles Lakers between the 2013 and 2014 season end dates here, he was the #1 ranked player, and he earned $30 million that season. So all I did, and I'm just going to delete the sheet here, all I did was, and I'm going to get a warning, I'm going to click delete, all I did was double click on this pivot table cell to see who that is. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing over here for 2015. I'm going to double click on this number here, this 1, for this 25 to 29.9 million, and let's see who it is. And it's still Kobe Bryant. So he earned $25 million in that season. I'm going to again come over here, right click and delete this tab. Click delete. Okay, and I can do this for any one of these items. So for this 10 here between 20 and $24.9 million, let's see who these people were. So we have all of these individuals here. So what that basically just does is give me a little bit more insight into those individuals that make up these salary buckets. Pivot tables are an extremely robust way to slice and dice your data without having to do much manual analysis. So I did everything inside of a pivot table. I've got our averages, I've got our totals, I've bucketed things. I've done several different types of analysis using the pivot table as the medium to do that. So if I wanted to bring my pivot table back to where I was, I could just move a few items around. So I drop my salaries here. You can see that it's still at account level, so I can come back over here and I can just click on this down arrow and I can click on value field settings and change this back to sum. And what I can do then is change my formatting using the quick formatting menu up here, reduce my decimal places, increase my cell sizes, and now I have my total salaries by NBA season. So you can see the salaries increased year over year for the 2010 through 2015 seasons. I can then drag in my team name, and then I'm back to where I started with the teams on the row, the season start on the headers, and my salary metrics. Right in the middle or the meat of the pivot table. Okay, so that is pivot tables in a nutshell. You're going to use these a lot as an analyst, and this is just a quick introduction on the power of pivot tables and their multiple uses in an analysis.